Hello to all my Diversity Matters subscribers. My name is Oscar Holmes IV, and I really appreciate your support. And to show you how much I appreciate your support, as a Diversity Matters subscriber, you get exclusive access to listen to Beyond the Mill, my live diversity dialogues talk show that I created and host on campus at Rutgers University-Camden. Now, because it's a live show and recorded using a different system, the audio quality isn't as consistent at times, but I promise you, the guests and content are great and you'll love the show. Plus, if you're ever in the area, please join us to be a part of our live audience so that you can enjoy, listen, learn, network, and ask our guests questions in real time. Enjoy the show.
So all of the mess that we get on this tenure track is this metaphor for the mill. So we're on the mill. So for the longest time, when people earned tenure, they graduated from on the mill. But they didn't have anywhere else to go. So they came back and told me that they loved the support and camaraderie on the mill, and they wish they still had this now that as a tenure track professor. So I created for them Beyond the Mill, because they earned tenure, they got over the mess, and now they are beyond this mill. So when I thought about the concept of this show and the name of the show, my executive producer, TiAira, and I, we bounced around several names. But I thought this would be a safe space for us to talk about a lot of these diversity issues. And I know that we can get beyond all of this mess, right? So for our first episode, I thought of no one else who could help us get beyond this mess, beyond the mill, than our very own Professor Stacy Hawkins. Professor Hawkins graduated with a BA from University of Virginia. She got a JD from Georgetown Law Center, and she was an accomplished attorney in private practice. She has written a number of highly influential articles, and she's a recently tenured full professor of law here at Rutgers Law School at Camden, right? So, Professor Hawkins is going to be here today, my first guest, to talk about one of her highly influential papers that she recently authored called Race Conscious Admission Plan, an Antidote to Educational Opportunity Hoarding. So, please help me welcome my first guest, Professor Hawkins. So, how are you, Hawkins?
I am delighted. I am so honored to be the first guest on your show.
Yeah. Is it okay for me to say this? I think Professor Hawkins is like my work wife.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Your work wife?
Yes, absolutely. Don't tell Chris.
I know. So let's do this real quick. So we're going to talk about the serious stuff, but I want to just start off light so that our audience can get a chance to get to know you better. Okay. So tell us, what brought you to Rutgers? Because you had a very successful career, private practice. So what brought you?
I did. I was in practice for about 12 years before I came to Rutgers, which is a really long time for academics. Most academics in the law, they practice for maybe 2, maximum 5 years, mostly doing clerkships and other types of fellowships, preparing for law teaching. So I was unusual having practiced for so long, and quite frankly, had never thought about coming into the legal academy, but I was doing diversity practice management in practice, and I was really concerned about where this discipline was going, and in particular, how the law was going to ultimately respond to it. And I remember being a part of a lot of conversations in practice about thought leaders in the practice world, and I thought, that's what I want to be. I want to be a thought leader. That sounds really important and special. And so I thought, what's the best way to become the kind of thought leader that I want to be? And it turned out that academics were doing the kind of work that I thought were really influencing the dialogue around diversity issues, in particular trying to influence courts about these issues. So I thought, academician, that's what I need to do.
And we're happy to have you here. Stacy and I, as soon as I got here in 2013, I don't know what the kid it was. I don't know why.
It's because my maiden name is Holmes. Hello,
Yeah.
we're like distant cousins.
Right,
We're
really
like
distant cousins.
kindred spirits.
Right. That's really interesting. I mean, it's true. Her maiden name is Holmes. So we could be like distant cousins. All right, so you went to UVA. I'm from Virginia, so again, you could be distant cousins.
Yes.
Right? What made you choose UVA, and like, what was your best experience like that? That you could tell us. That you could tell us.
So you guys are all in undergrad. Maybe some of you have graduated into graduate school, but honestly, I can say UVA doesn't have a party reputation for nothing. There's pretty much not much that I didn't love about my undergraduate experience. It was great. Charlottesville is a great place to go to school. It's kind of a college town.
Except now.
Gorgeous. Well, I mean, it had that one weekend of tarnish on its long-standing reputation for,
well, they had a selling,
well,
that's a tarnish as well.
That's before the university. That's Jefferson.
Yeah.
It is Mr. Jefferson's University,
Yeah.
but we like to think that we have progressed beyond that. It's actually one of the, and this is not what drove me to UVA, but I think a point of pride for me, and one of the reasons why I really love UVA, is that UVA historically has had a really strong reputation for not only admitting large numbers of minority students, but for graduating large numbers of minority students. In fact, it continues to have the honor of being the school that is a non-HBCU that graduates the largest number of Black students of any college or university in the country. In fact, there is not an HBCU that graduates more Black people than UVA, except for Howard University, right? So that is a mothership of HBCUs. And so it really, I think, is an environment that cultivates, Black students. It really is inclusive and, dynamic place for its students of color. And so it was a really great place, not only get a great education, but to really, come of age, right? I mean, college is a time for you to come into your own as an adult, and it was a great place to do that.
That's one of my regrets in life. It's not going to do that.
Oh yeah, of course it should be. As a Virginia native, come on.
But let me explain. I went to VCU undergrad, which is where I wanted to go to undergrad. But for my master's degree, I did part-time. And so I chose University of Richmond, which is a private.
You messed up twice.
You
had two opportunities to go to
at least two. And it was only because I didn't want to drive all the way to Charlottesville from Richmond. But now, since I'm paying back student loans, and if you know anything about University of Richmond, it's very expensive to attend there.
All 2 hours? You didn't want to drive all 2 hours?
So that is truthfully a regret of mine. I wish I could get my master's. I mean, but it's still, I got a great education, but half the cost, less the cost to go to university.
Yeah, and it's still one of the best things for the buck in terms of university.
So I am reading Dolly Chu's book, The Person You Need to Be Right Now. So if you are interested in learning how to eliminate or mitigate biases, Dolly Chu is a friend of mine. She's a professor of management at NYU Stern. So I definitely recommend that book. What is Professor Hawkins doing?
So Professor Hawkins does very little leisure reading, and I'm sure that was not exactly leisure reading for you either. What I do, so I am, and it didn't actually occur to me until I came back to school as a professor and not a teacher, that I am just an avid learner. I love to learn new things. And so one of the things that I'm obsessed with now, because I don't have a chance to read like I would like to, is that I listen to podcasts. I'm often in the car, and I frequently find myself driving even up to New Brunswick, so I have a long drive, and it's a perfect opportunity to listen to podcasts. So I've listened to TED Talks. One of the things that I'm really fascinated with, I'm not a scientist, I'm not even a social scientist, but Hidden Brain with Shankar Vedanta on NPR, I love it. It's like he just has the most fascinating stories. So that's kind of obsessed with him.
So I like Adam Grant.
Yeah, Adam Grant, that's right. Work Life. That's another good one.
All right, so now we're going to transition to like a lightning round.
Okay.
So I'm going to just throw questions at you.
Okay.
And answer really quickly.
Okay.
All right. You prefer texting or talking?
Talking.
What city is better, New York or Philadelphia?
Philadelphia, I hate New York.
Christmas. Scandal or Grey's Anatomy?
I've never watched Grey's Anatomy. Can't do it.
Oh, that's what we said.
Okay, that's right.
Who's a better actor, Viola Davis or Regina King?
Ooh, that's a hard one. I'm gonna have to give it to Regina King because she's been holding it down since 227. I mean, that's a long time. Although Viola Davis is classically trained, she's amazing.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna have to give it to her.
I can do that. All right. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the absolute worst, and 10 being the absolute best, where it comes in.
Ooh, negative 2,000.
That too. I was gonna go to the negative side.
Yeah, really.
What's the last?
Like, can we have a trade, please?
Right. I'm not a fan of
you have
trade.
ever seen David Chappelle.
I'm not a fan of trade.
The Black Draft. We want to get rid of Kanye, please.
Last book you read.
The last book that I read was Blind Spot by Rutgers University-Camden.
Okay, that's good. Last song you downloaded.
So I did not download. So I'm a nerd. I listen to podcasts. My kids and my husband, they literally harass me because every time they get in my car, it's on WHYY. Like, I don't listen to music. I only listen to talk radio.
I think about that song. I think it was an indie artist, TiAira.
Yeah, I mean, it would probably be either the only albums that I have. Don't judge. The only albums that I have in my iTunes are Adele, Jill Scott, TiAira, and none of them has released an album in a while, so we know that's old.
Okay. Say a word first. Okay. BMW Mercedes.
Like,
Quick.
I'm gonna tell you everyone.
Quick. That's BMW Mercedes.
Oh, Mercedes.
Okay. All right, this is hard one. If Barack Obama and Michelle Obama were drowning, they would say what food you say.
Barack would have to swim. Hopefully he can swim. He's from Hawaii. Right.
Is it wrong for vegetarian animal crackers?
No. Unless it's made with animal fat. That's like the corny joke thing, right? Do you follow, what's her name? Beyonce's mother?
Tina?
Tina Knowles. The corny joke. She does the corny joke thing on Instagram. That was one of hers. You should share that.
All right, so my last one.
Okay.
Fill in the blank. Beyonce is.
Okay.
Oh!
Do not have to be high. Come for me. Don't do
Wait
it.
a minute. Okay. So we're going to just get back to no one is Beyonce.
I think she's a good singer.
For sure. Don't do Aretha Franklin. Gals. Gals.
She is.
She's a great singer.
She's a good singer.
We're going to move on.
She's a great entertainer.
All right, so we're going to get a little bit more serious.
Okay.
All right. But thank you for playing.
No, that was fun. I was a little bit nervous at first with the lightning round, but quickly. Don't hesitate.
Yeah. So let's get into this really, really interesting paper on race composition plan and antidote to educational opportunity and hoarding. So when we think about this concept of affirmative action, and we think about race conscious mission plans, a lot of times we just think of this as something new that the courts have just decided upon. But the truth of the matter is that we've had de facto affirmative action for centuries in this country. Why do you think people don't associate the laws that state basically just white people to get education, higher education, and many times just like men, as affirmative action and race conscious mission?
I think it's because when we refer to affirmative action, we mean something very specific that is grounded in a historic context and a legal definition that really is about remedying past discrimination, particularly on behalf of women and people of color, most specifically in the domains of education and employment. So affirmative action is a policy that was adopted right under President Kennedy in the 1960s as a part of the civil rights movement to redress centuries of discrimination in this country against both women and people of color. And so when we think about it, when we talk about it in our modern context, affirmative action, that is what we mean. We mean that historic moment and that legal moment when President Kennedy signed into law the affirmative action guidelines. And so the affirmative action that you're talking about was just business as usual, right? That was just the way things were. People didn't understand it as outside the norm. It was the norm. It was affirmative action that became the exception, right? And it has been seen as exceptional ever since. I want to add, though, that I always like to make very clear that one of the things that my work tries to do is to distinguish that very specific historic and legal reference to affirmative action, right? This exceptional thing that we did trying to remedy past discrimination against women and minorities, from the kind of race-conscious admissions plans that we have today that are motivated by concerns for improving diversity, right? Not remedying past discrimination. And so a lot of people conflate affirmative action and these race-conscious admissions programs. I tend not to want to do that, although because it is the term that is most commonly used in the literature, I do use it, but I always qualify it.
Sounds good. So I think for most of us, this idea of race-conscious admissions or affirmative action has really gotten back into our attention because of the Affirmative Action case. Could you kind of remind our audience members, what that case was about and the implications of that case?
Mm-hmm. So Abigail Fisher kind of is very far into the historic timeline around affirmative action. So in order to understand Abigail Fisher, you have to go all the way back to 1978. Remember I said affirmative action began really in the 1960s when President Kennedy signed into law the affirmative action guidelines promoting the inclusion of women and people of color, both in the educational and in the employment domain. So colleges and universities started including more women and minorities under these affirmative action guidelines. And in 1978, a white applicant by the name of Alan Bakke, who was denied admission to the University of California at Davis Medical School, challenged these affirmative action programs. And the Supreme Court had occasion to consider whether or not those affirmative action programs in college and university admissions were constitutional, right? Whether they were permitted under the law that says, generally speaking, race is not a consideration that the government should be making when it decides how to give people benefits or to burden people in some way. And it turns out there are 9 members of the Supreme Court. It is one of the many cases where the court kind of split 5-4, and even the 5 justices who said what California was doing was wrong, they couldn't agree why. And so it was a very highly fractured decision that left a lot of uncertainty about whether or not colleges and universities could continue to use race in their admissions. And it wasn't until 25 years later, in 2003, in a case involving the University of Michigan, that the court had occasion to take that question up again and to finally decide conclusively, again, though, in a decision 5-4, that colleges and universities were indeed permitted to use race in their admissions processes. But, and this is an important note, they said not to remedy past discrimination. They can do it if they're seeking to diversify their student body. But it turns out that between 1978 and 2003, when we were in a state of legal limbo, the state of Texas said, well, we don't really know what the law is, so rather than try to do something that might be problematic, we're going to pursue diversity another way. And they adopted, through legislation, what is called the Top 10% Plan, which guarantees admission into a Texas state school for those students who graduate in the top 10% of their class at any public high school in the state of Texas. And the reason why they knew this Top 10% Plan would increase the diversity of students being admitted to schools is that the high schools in the state of Texas were highly segregated, right? They're racially segregated. So if you just guarantee admission to the top 10% of all students, then those students who attend predominantly Black and Hispanic schools would necessarily, right, also have students in the top 10% of their graduating class who would be guaranteed admission. And true to form, that's what happened. They were able to increase the diversity of their student body through that top 10% plan. But it didn't really increase diversity as much as they wanted, particularly not at their flagship school, the University of Texas, which is the best public school in Texas. It didn't have as much of an effect there. So after the decision by the Supreme Court in 2003 saying, yes, conclusively, 5 justices agreed you can use race in college admissions, Texas decided, okay, now that we're sure it's permitted, we're going to go back and we're going to supplement the top 10% plan, which is getting us some diversity, but not as much as we want. And at the University of Texas, we're going to layer on top of that top 10% plan a race-conscious admissions plan. So they do that. And in 2008, Abigail Fisher is denied admission to the University of Texas because she doesn't qualify under the top 10% plan. She has not graduated in the top 10% of her class. And under the supplemental race-conscious admissions plan, she was also not admitted. She then sues and says Texas can't engage in race-conscious admissions because if it was looking for diversity, it was getting enough through the top 10% plan, and so therefore the supplemental race-conscious plan was not permitted. And the courts took that case up in Fisher v. Texas, and finally in 2016 gave us a decision saying that Texas was in fact still permitted because it was not getting as much diversity as it thought it needed through the top 10% plan. It was permissible for them to have that race-conscious.
So in addition to losing that case, she had a real swift backlash on social media as well. The state that had the backlash. Did you participate in that backlash?
So I did not, and I don't know if we've had this conversation before. So the Stay Mad Abby was actually something that happened after the oral arguments, but before the case was decided. And I don't know if any of you are familiar, but apparently there was a lot, not apparently, there was a lot of offense taken at some comments that Justice Scalia made from the bench during oral arguments where he suggested that perhaps Black and Hispanic students should not be admitted to the University of Texas because they weren't academically prepared to perform at that caliber of school. And so there were a number of people on social media, particularly because it was during graduation season when the case was under consideration by the court, where Black and Hispanic people posted images of themselves graduating from, elite schools and the hashtag Stay Mad Abby. And I simply said, I very seriously doubt that the 9 justices of the Supreme Court are following that social media campaign, and even if they are, I assure you they will not be swayed by that campaign. And so I thought, social media activism is great. I thought that was not a particularly effective form of social activism. It might have made people feel that it was cathartic for those people, but it was fun. It was empowering, I think, to kind of demonstrate that, these Black and Hispanic students could go to these schools and they could compete effectively and they could succeed and they could graduate. And so denying them admission in the first instance was truly a harm to people who could demonstrate their ability to matriculate through these schools.
And I think it's important to state that she ended up going to LSU, which is another great flagship university, and graduated from LSU. So it's not like the life is Brooklyn and season one joy.
Yeah.
You brought up the social media campaign and whether or not it would be effective. What about amicus briefs? ACLU wrote one, other people may send in one. How effective are those in terms of swaying justice's decision in these cases? Or is it a waste of time? Or is it just, I'm writing one to put my name out there and get donations?
Highly effective. As a matter of fact, the volume of the Journal of College and University Law that this particular article that Oscar is talking about appeared in, that I authored, there was another article authored by some social scientists who talked about the increasing impact of social science research and amicus briefs on Supreme Court decision making. And so it has become phenomenally important. As a matter of fact, and I don't know if it still holds the record, but at the time, the 2003 case that I mentioned involving the University of Michigan's race-conscious admissions plan, it held the record for the highest number of amicus briefs filed in a single case heading before the Supreme Court. I mean, there were just hundreds of briefs filed on either side. Some of the briefs were filed on behalf of hundreds of parties, and so it's been a huge groundswell around interested parties filing amicus briefs in these kinds of cases. And not only have they been influential? But they've been cited in a number of the decisions by the Supreme Court justices themselves, both the majority and the dissent cite these three. So they are highly impactful.
Was I the only one who pronounced that wrong all my life? Because I those evidence degrees. So I was the only one. Was I the only one?
It's like tomato model.
I just learned something when you said, I was like, oh, that's how you pronounce that.
No, I think it's okay. People probably say it both ways.
Okay. So Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg thinks that affirmative action is settled, but many people disagree with that.
I don't think she thinks that anymore.
Oh,
and so she said that in the immediate aftermath of the decision in Fisher. And she was quoted in the New York Times as having said this issue is now finally settled, right? It was unsettled for 25 years after the University of California case. In 2003, the court spoke on the issue, but if that wasn't enough for people, we spoke again in 2016, and this ought to be enough, right? We have fully and finally settled this issue, but I think she probably recognizes that that was a premature statement on her part. And it was premature for two reasons. One, because Justice Kennedy, who authored the opinion on behalf of the court in the Fisher versus Texas case, said Texas is really unique. And this case is probably limited to its facts. It doesn't have any broader application. And maybe even the University of Texas couldn't defend this program if it comes back to the court in later years. Maybe later on they'll have enough diversity through their top 10% plan that will say they can't, right, use race-conscious admissions anymore. But also, even at the time that she said it, when Fisher was pending before the court, more suits had already been filed against other colleges and universities, including specifically Harvard University has been sued, and the University of North Carolina has been sued in cases challenging their race-conscious admissions. And those cases are working their way through the lower courts as we speak. And it is expected that one, if not both of those cases, will ultimately make it back up to the Supreme Court. So the court will consider this issue again, and by the time it considers this issue, we know Justice Kennedy has already gone through the court, and we know that Justice Scalia has been replaced by another conservative justice, and so depending on who fills that 9th seat right now and when the case gets heard, we could very much see a different outcome in a future affirmative action.
So you challenge the idea that people disagree with affirmative action based on principles of meritocracy, but instead they just want to afford opportunities. Could you tell us what you mean by that and elaborate on that idea?
Yeah, so I was mentioning that I was reading Blind Spot, and this was for another project that I was doing, and I do a lot of work at the intersection of law and kind of social and cognitive psychology. And I've been doing another project where I was introduced to this kind of social dominance theory and the phenomenon of opportunity hoarding. And I thought that is a really interesting theory, and I wonder what kind of application it has in other contexts. And so I started thinking about how I could approach the issue of race-conscious admissions programs differently. And one of the chief arguments against race-conscious admissions programs is that they undermine principles of meritocracy that we believe ought to govern the determination of who gets admitted to the nation's colleges and universities, particularly the most elite colleges and universities. Again, UT was about not just admission to Texas schools, but to Texas's flagship school, right? This was the best school in the state of Texas. The University of Michigan case, it was about, right, the kind of flagship school. It was not about Michigan State, right? It was not about Ohio State. It was about the University of Michigan. And so when I was thinking about this, I thought about this principle in social dominance theory. A sociologist theorized that all societies develop hierarchies based on some dimension of social identity, right? And so these hierarchies are inevitable. They might differ across societies, but they inevitably result in social hierarchies. And the way in which those social hierarchies get kind of formed and reinforced, one mechanism is through opportunity hoarding. That those at the top of the social hierarchy actually try to assure their access to the most coveted resources in society and try to exclude those at the bottom of the social hierarchy. And when I thought about who the challengers were in these cases against race-conscious admissions programs and who they were claiming, right, were the wrongful beneficiaries of these race-conscious admissions programs, I thought, Well, almost always white and now increasingly Asian plaintiffs were bringing these cases, and they were challenging them because they wanted to exclude Blacks and Hispanics. And if we think about our social hierarchy in America, we tend to find, particularly in the educational domain, that whites and Asians tend to be have access to more elite educational experiences. They tend to have greater educational attainment than Blacks and Hispanics. And so I thought, what would it look like to apply this theory of social dominance and opportunity hoarding to race-conscious admissions programs, and ask the question whether or not, by pointing to meritocracy, it really is just people who already have some sort of social advantage around education trying to lock in that advantage while excluding other people.
Make a good point. I think we see a lot of schools now moving away from standardized testing, SATs. Do you think that perhaps is in relation to these new groups challenging the admission policies, but also the fact that now so many elite schools are seeing large sizes of Asian applicants, and so now it's like we're trying to move the goalposts. We don't want to use SAT scores anymore because we are a constellation of a lot of different things. All right, let's look at these other aspects. What's your take on schools moving away from that? And I'm not taking any side up, because I know limitations of SAT scores and all that type of things, but it's interesting in this moment when you have the shift of perhaps people who compete for it, may not compete on the test, saying let's do away with the test. Let's look at these other things.
Right. So one of the reasons why I thought that opportunity hoarding fit the pattern of these challenges to race-conscious admissions programs is because if the argument is that we should be doing it on the basis of merit, most of how they define merit is around academic credentials, and they really emphasize standardized tests. And the empirical evidence from all of the researchers demonstrates that they are not highly predictive of academic ability, and that they are actually less predictive than things like GPA, which are less heavily relied on than these standardized tests. And so I think that undermines the meritocracy argument, but it is also, I think, an acknowledgement on behalf of colleges and universities that there is now an overwhelming body of evidence undermining the empirical force of standardized tests as a true measure of ability. And so they are starting to recognize that there's no good reason empirically for us to rely so heavily on this measure that is proven not particularly useful as a predictive measure. But it's also, I think, legitimately an attempt on behalf of colleges and universities to increase the diversity of their student body, because these standardized tests are one of the largest ways in which students who already have educational advantages game the system, right? Because we know that those tests oftentimes are more a measure of socioeconomic advantage than they are of academic ability, right? And so people who are already privileged are locking in their privilege. They're gaining disproportionate advantage by relying on a test that's more about their privilege. It's more a measure of privilege than it is of ability. So colleges and universities have gotten smart and said, okay, if we want to increase diversity and we don't want to allow people to game the system by using their privilege as a basis for getting disproportionate access, we'll abandon the test. Now, part of the problem, and I've read at least some critiques of that, is that opportunity hoarding is a malleable mechanism for gaining access to scarce resources. And so there's already evidence that people are adapting to this new system and finding ways to gain it as well, right? So it's not clear that colleges and universities, to the extent that they've adopted as a means of expanding access for a broader range of students, that it's not just going to serve the same purpose that the SAT or the ACT serve.
So I have some more questions to ask, but I'd like to open it up to our delightful audience. Do you have any questions you want to ask Professor Hawkins on this topic or other related topics?
Stacy, your logic for the ACT, SAT, how does it carry over to graduate level, higher level for LSATs and GMATs and MCATs? Do they carry over nicely, seamlessly, or are there points of inflection there that might require a more nuanced?
So I cannot speak to the MCAT or the GRE or the GMAT, but what I do know is with respect to the LSAT, because I practice in the legal academy, and I do know that the LSAT is at most predictive for first year grades, and it has diminishing predictive value after the first year. But again, it is still not as predictive as undergraduate GPA. So just like high school GPA is more predictive of student performance in college than the SAT is, undergraduate GPA is more predictive of performance in law school than LSAT performance is. And so in both contexts, it has relatively low predictive value. It is not as predictive as the over-reliance on it as a measure of screening applicants for admission might suggest. So I think that there is a consistent empirical foundation for discrediting the LSAT as a screening tool as the SAT. I can't say about the other tests.
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar with GMAT, I would argue, but do you think ABA at any point would come around to this viewpoint?
So I think one of the reasons why it continues to be used is because it's a standardized measure. And GPA, whether it's high school or undergraduate, is not standardized because not all schools are created equally and not all people's, course selection is created equal. So a GPA from, the University of Virginia might not be the same as a GPA from Piedmont Community College. And I, even as a UVA student, might have taken a much more rigorous course load than my fellow UVA graduate. And so my GPA might be reflective of a lot of things. And so in order to standardize consideration of students for admissions purposes, they think that the standardized test, it's the same test for everybody. So it's one measure of comparing people consistently. And so I do think that it is worth considering whether or not we might use its appropriate to that objective, right? Which is to say, minimize its consideration and understand it's just a way of uniformly comparing people, or to try to find other standardized measures, right? That may be if we could find ways to make sure that all schools consider. So, for instance, my son, I just found out my son is in high school now. He takes honors and AP classes, but his school doesn't weight honors and AP classes. Some high schools do weight honors and AP classes, right? And so, his academic profile and GPA can't be compared evenly to someone else's at another school. If we can figure out ways to standardize our consideration of students across these different contexts, then maybe we wouldn't have to be so heavily dependent on these standardized test scores.
Yeah, so I'm a fellow UVA grad,
Yay!
and I serve on a board there called the IDEA Fund, Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access, and we're a group of alumni who collaborate with the university to influence the climate and culture on campus. I just wonder, in your research, if you've identified for schools that are closest to the ideal that you imagine for admissions and the inclusiveness of that admissions process and equity principles being embedded, what are the major influences that have driven those campuses to do it? Is it alum? Is it administration? What other leverage points have you seen be the most influential in causing schools to get closer to the ideal you imagine?
So that's an interesting question, and one that I have not studied. If I could answer a slightly different question, which is that one of the things that a research project that I'm currently working on is how schools could best serve, because one of the issues around race-conscious admissions plan is that we do know that there are educational inequalities, especially around race, but also around socioeconomic status. And so some students may be less well prepared to compete, but that doesn't mean that they don't have the ability to compete effectively. And so one of the things that we've been doing with this meritocracy argument is screening out people who, though they have the ability, right, the aptitude, they may not have the preparation at that point to compete. And I think that it's inappropriate to screen out those students who have the aptitude to compete, but who are maybe underprepared relative to their peers. So the question becomes, if we're going to say colleges and universities should be admitting a broader range of students who have the ability to compete, but who may have different levels of preparation, how do we serve all of those people effectively? I think that there is a growing body of research, and it's not just around minority students, it's around first-generation students, it's around part-time students, it's around non-traditional students of all kinds, where colleges and universities struggle, right? Because they come with different levels of preparation, they come with different, perhaps, personal challenges that they experience while they're in school. How do we effectively serve them and make sure that they are vibrant and productive members of the community? And that's really what diversity and inclusion is all about. How can we bring everyone together in this community, but not just have them here, but have them succeed? Because we're not doing anyone any favors if we allow people admission and then let them fail, right? Especially if we know that they might be less well prepared. We think that they have the ability, but they don't have the preparation, and so we just leave them to sink or swim on their own. And so I think that there is lots of research around the kinds of things that we need to be doing there, and providing kind of academic support, making sure that students have appropriate role models, people who are invested in their success as students, faculty and other administrators, making sure that students have culturally relevant instruction in the classroom and outside of the classroom. These are all of the things that so far in my research I'm learning are critical components of a robust, multi-faceted approach to having an effective diversity program.
So thank you so much. That was amazing. You have enlightened me a lot as someone who studied this topic as well, and I'm sure Professor Hawkins enlightened me and you. So please join me in thanking Professor Hawkins. Before we leave, I want to leave you with this quote from Dr. Martin Luther King that states that at the time, power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. Justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. So I think that's a great parting quote for us. I hope to see you back here November 7th, same time, same place, right, TiAira? All right. Our next episode, too, I will have Dr. Jason Rivera and Dr. Cameron Whitley as our guests, and that show is entitled LGBTQ and You. So thank you so much for coming to our first show. I know we have a lot going on campus, so you could have been a lot of different places, but you chose to spend your time here, and for that I am eternally grateful. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Mill and for being a Diversity Matters subscriber. If you enjoyed the show and want to hear more, please post, talk about, and reshare our show with all of your friends and family. And leave us a favorable review so that it will make it easier for others to find us wherever they listen to podcasts. We cannot do this important work or keep it going without you, so we really appreciate your support. Beyond the Mill is produced by me, Oscar Holmes IV, and TiAira Neal, and receives generous support from Rutgers University-Camden's Office of Diversity Inclusion and Office of Student Affairs. Diversity Matters is produced by WH Consulting, a firm that provides a wide range of management consulting and professional services to individuals and organizations. Original music produced by Sincere Morton Murray. Until next time, peace and love.